Yo, chill. So this debate will be held in Discord.gg/Enten, ENTEN. This is where we host tournaments and all types of things. Yes. The debate will be between Flo and this dog shit loser named ZIZOU who lost to Mario just a couple minutes ago. The topic will be on theism, and we will see ZIZOU get his head ripped off, part two.
Ah, ironic. Okay.
All right, beautiful. So now that we got that amazing introduction, it was like pure pulchritude. So
Yes,
to get back to
nice.
my point, it seems that I'm going to be taking an atheist view that believes in God. Oh my God, wait, he conceded. No. So when you're believing in God, obviously believing in God is going to be distinct from believing in the existence of God. Just like how you can believe in a teleological endpoint, such that, well, Luffy might become, you might say Luffy will become the king of the pirates. But Luffy is a fictional character for which it's going to be non-existent in itself, but it can be subsistent and inherent. So in this sense, I would just say that God is that for which subsists or inheres, but he's not going to be that for which exists. So I'm an atheist in that sense, but I believe in God. I'm going to be
Okay.
saying
Okay.
that,
So
obviously, we're
okay. So
talking
when you
about
talk
God.
about
Go ahead.
teleology, okay.
Yeah, so when we're talking about God, for an example, we have these like primary productive force. In this sense, yes, I do watch One Piece, by the way. But when you talk about God, which is going to be primary productive force, and so far for which he's going to be precedent of that, for which is going to be the identity, which is going to be the determinations. In these sense, those are going to be like going to like his multiplicity, assemblages, etc. To say that he's going to be this overarching gerrymandering force in this sense. In this sense, it's going to be the individuation that is going to be reliant upon that of the identity for which cannot actually be there without that of the individuation that's going to underlie it. So in that sense, you might just say that the scarcity upon identity seems to silhouette the underlying force for which puts it in movement, for which is infinitely eluded by both. Go ahead.
You're done.
Go ahead.
Okay. So you talked about a few things. So the first part
Yeah.
you really talked about in your definition of atheism that affirms God is you talked about teleology or whatever the fuck how you pronounce it, which implies some form of outcome or end goal, like how you talked about Luffy becoming the king of the pirates or something like that. Even though it hasn't happened now, you're still affirming it in some form of future. And you talked about how God is some form of primary productive mover, and you talked about his individuation and stuff like that. So usually when we talk about certain definitions, right, obviously definitions are not like truth app, like nobody agrees that a definition is truth app,
ABC.
but what we do agree upon is definitions are used by consensus. and
Exactly.
obviously and obviously, like for example, if me and I don't know, like BZ are talking and chilling, and then he says that's a tree and points to a chair, and I say that's not a tree, I'm not saying that his definition is objectively false, but what I am saying is that's not how we define those terms. More, the reason why this is important here is because when we talk about theology, an important entailment of theology is one, that this God is personal. Nowhere in your definition that you provided it implies some form of personal creator that caters to us and interferes with the world for us. That's the first part of the thing that you miss completely and utterly. So that's
Uh-huh.
number one. Two, when you talk about teleology and you're talking about end goal, you're saying that there's an end goal for God to exist. And if that is the case, and that is the
Yes.
entailment of what you're saying, right? This is the first thing you brought up. You brought up telos. If that's the first thing that you brought up, that implies to us that there's some form of state affairs. I mean, my bad, a state of affairs or some form of cause that would imply this God would exist. The issue with that is when we look at all those definitions of God that you provided, it implies that God is some form of weird causal being that doesn't exist, which
Nope.
doesn't really one abide by any standard definition of theism, and also just doesn't adhere to what people define it just in general. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, so to go against one of the claims that you just made, the claimants, yeah, no, I don't believe that definitions have to come from a consensus. Obviously, it could be within itself or that very multiplicity. In that self, the definitions or the definitions can come from the environmental conditions under which the agents can be independent of. Hence, it doesn't need no agential power. It could just be coming from that thing for which is going to be naturalistically construed, or in this sense, constructive. Now, in this sense, I would probably say that, yeah, it's not going to be a classical theistic God. I never said I was going to be positing a type of theistic God, let alone I'm never going to say that I'm going to be positing any type of traditional God. Obviously, those are going to be characteristics of an individual subject in this sense. But we're going before that, we're going to go pre-personal or pre-individual in this sense. In this sense, for which is going to be differentiation in itself, for which we're going to have the productive process by which reality is going to be continually generating differences, then God is no longer going to be one of the being among of this type of supreme subject, for which that's going to be the identity, which is just going to be stratified in some sort of way. but rather it is going to have or be, in this sense, the very activity of becoming in itself, for which can be eluding those of the types of stratifications of the present, for which that's going to be the realm of the bodies. So it's not going to deliberate, it's not going to choose between the alternatives, and it's not going to be an I. Obviously, we're going to be actually before that of the cogita. Actually, you can even bring up the larval subjects, which even then produces that of the subjectivity. But when speaking about my view, the God, in this sense, would have that immanent power for which is going to be continually emerging from then, or in this sense, the transformation for which is going to have a distinction. So, in this sense, I don't want to use it as functioning as this metaphysical principle, um, or in this sense. I would probably just say that it differentiates for which is going to be in itself form its multiplicity and its intensity insofar to giving this quasi cause. Because the causes are just going to be corporeal. Obviously, you can have the actual and the virtual being that for which is going to be co-constitutive of one another. So when you talk about the virtual, in this sense, it's going to be a quasi cause for which inheres and just produces and subsists within that of the actual. But the causes are going to be at the corporeal level, for which then actually produces that of the event, for which the event is going to actually be that which is going to actually be incorporeal. Hopefully you got that. I just made that simple for you. Now, understanding that, no, it's not going to be a personal God. No, it's not going to have a consensus amongst the agents. And two, I just said Luffy for the teleological endpoint. I never said that God was a teleological endpoint. I never even bring up teleology insofar to God. I was just saying that obviously you can have these instances under which Luffy would be teleologically having this end goal such that he will become the king of the pirates, and then he would be this. Obviously, I'm going against that whole entire setup because I don't believe anything is like teleological and so far to an endpoint, because I believe everything is going to be rhizomatically constrained. But when I'm speaking about it in this sense, I'm saying that you can have these instances that seem coherent under which you can have these non-existent goals, such that Luffy, you may typically agree, would not be existent. But he is still going to be that for which you can believe in insofar to his activity towards a goal, which is totally fine. Yeah, Gyro. The guy, MZ, he's too
Catch
good.
your breath,
But
bro.
anyway,
Catch your breath.
to get back to what I was trying to say, no, I was talking to Gyro in the chat.
I
So,
know. I'm just telling you to catch your breath in general, bro. You
yeah,
sound
that
like
right
you're out
there,
of breath.
please. No, I think I'm pretty okay right now. But you
Are you
can,
sure?
just, yeah, I'm pretty sure. You can,
All right.
like,
Are you ready for me
be
to
quiet for a
respond, or
second.
you still like have a few
No,
more
no, I'm
thoughts that you
still
want to
going to
give?
keep on going because I feel like you're going to not track me again for like the 60th time.
Yeah, definitely, bro.
Yeah, okay, no, be quiet, Indonesian fucking bullfrog. Now, look, the main point is this. The main point is this.
So
So when you're
rhetorical.
speaking, yeah, the main point is this. So when you're speaking about this type of God, obviously it's going to be incompatible for what you are going to be saying because it's going to be a primary productive power for which it's going to underlie it. We're going to be taking like a sadist view for which the sadism here under my philosophy, it's not going to be the typical sadism, so stop thinking that, but it's going to be a novel sadism for which it's just going to actually be up in this upheaval sense. So if you ever actually went into like the angle of depression within geometry, because I know you never like read any type of philosophical literature or any fucking mathematics, um, when you're going into it, it seems that above the horizon scaling, or that of the horizon scaling, seems to have this upheaval, such that the upheaval is actually going to give rise towards that of something that's going to be stratified on the downward heaval. So, in this sense, you would probably just say that it's going to be incompatible with your classical norms, your normativity, and everything that you're going to be taking. I want you to go ahead and just justify all those normativities under your view. But I'm not going to hold to any type of justification that's going to be that aberrant model of thought, or in this way, the dogmatic imagery of thoughts in this sense. For which I'm not going to be saying that justification is going to actually be required of me, but you're probably going to be inquiring in those types of representational primacies, for which it's not going to be my view. Because if you do hold to my view, then that would be a concession automatically to my God. But obviously you don't. So I'm just going to be saying that's going to be a dogmatic image of thought, for which is going to be underlined from the thought, for which is going to go into encounter. So I don't have to hold that the truth is just going to be that for which is going to go towards that of the thought, or the thought is going to go that on the truth, like how it was stated in, like, I think page 25, 1991, what is philosophy. But I am going to say that it's going to be the false that liberates that of the true, such that the false is just going to break the rigid structure. So how the false liberates the form of the true, for which is just going to be deterritorializing your type of view into a destructed reality, into a more constructive, novel, in movement and in progression type of reality, such that it's going to be proceeding. So it's not that your view is going to be that for which is going to be false, prescriptively speaking. but it's going to be saying that your view is just going to be confused from an underlying primacy for which is just going to be preceded by what I am saying. So in this sense, your view is just a fragment dynamic fold of an underlying point. So it's like you're making a silhouetting point. So in that sense, that's just going to be the view. You can go against it now.
Okay, sure. So you made a lot of
Oh,
claims. Oh, you're done, or is there anything else? Sorry. Okay, so the first thing you talked about was
yeah,
that
when I'm mute.
your definition doesn't adhere to consensus. This is the first part. And one, that isn't really clear and doesn't explain what you're trying to say. Because what I explained explicitly at the beginning was that when people communicate or a language, that implies consensus in general. Because in order to have a society to function, that society needs a manner or a way to communicate. That's how we're all talking. That implies that we all have definitions that we adhere to. And that's why the example that I gave, where I'm sitting with someone and we're looking at trees, and he says, "Look, that's cheese." We obviously say, "No, that's not cheese, that's the tree." And the justification for that isn't that his definition is objectively false, but rather that's not the society's function the uses as the definition. And that's what I meant by that. So when you say that you're not using it adhering to the consensus, that doesn't mean anything. Two, you started talking about how it comes from environmental conditions, and that's what definitions come from. But when you look at that, what are environmental conditions? Are they not the society that we're in? Are they not the humans that create those languages? Is it not those things? You said that you don't hold to classical definitions. So if that's true, then you're clearly agreeing with what I said earlier. You're just not holding to a classical definition of theology. You're not holding to a classical definition of theism. And then you proceed to talk about things that just completely contradict what you said earlier. You talked about God being supreme. You talked about God who's going to be an immanent power that's going to be emerging. You talked about all those things. But if you already granted earlier that the entailment of what you said, that if God doesn't exist yet, but is going to exist, then it is clearly the case that obviously then there has to be some cause. It's not some quasi cause. It can't be a metaphorical cause like God being guilty or something like that. And what I mean by guilty is obviously like that's the example of quasi causality, where obviously if you say someone's guilty, it's not actually the guilt that's putting them in jail, but it's like some form of metaphorical cause. Obviously that is not what we're talking about here, because God needs something physically to make him exist, and that's kind of the point here. So you bringing up quasi causality, all this bullshit doesn't really matter. So just moreover, to follow up with everything I was really talking about, you said later that, oh, you weren't actually using teleology for God, you're using it for Luffy. I was under the impression that you were using it for God, because why else would you bring something so irrelevant and so arbitrary? I don't get the relevance of Luffy. I thought you were just trying to use an example with Luffy to apply it to God. You try to explain how an atheist position can hold to God, and that was the entailment of what you said, where you said God doesn't exist, but later on he can exist. And the entailment of that is what I said. You can't bring up quasi forms of causation. That doesn't work. So right off the bat, a lot of the yap that you said is just clearly false and just not true. And then a lot of the stuff that you brought about how I'm presupposing normativity, I'm presupposing certain accounts of reality, those things don't really matter. And the reason why they don't matter is because there's such fundamental presuppositions that don't affect the conclusion of this debate. Obviously, when we're debating on any topic, every debate, no matter what, has fundamental presuppositions. Not only can presuppositions be good for debates, sometimes they're downright necessary. And I'll give you guys examples. For example, the presupposition that we should speak in English, the dialectical structure that we're debating. Why should we debate in this VC? Why should we debate in
Blunder.
with the recording? All those things are obviously presuppositions. We didn't debate about those things, but in order to have a conversation, we had to presuppose those things, and that's what I mean by it. So when you talk about normativity and you talk about all these things that don't affect the conclusion about theology, it doesn't actually affect or progress our conversation. I don't really care to talk about them, and I'm not interested in talking about them. And if you say that I'm quote unquote dodging, sure, I'm dodging the irrelevant stuff. So respond to all the other stuff. You made a few mistakes and you made a few contradictions. Yeah, and then hopefully we can progress.
Oh, blunder! This nigga's a retard! Yeah, so I could go ahead and just explain this to you. So yeah, you said the normativity commitments don't matter. I'm gonna go into that in a second. I'm gonna show you why that's a blunder too. But let's get back into the main point. Holy fucking shit. You said it's not clear. Your definition appeals to the consensus. So you're trying to say that in this sense, we have this sensicality, which seems to be, I guess in this sense, not as functive or clear insofar to the point it gets to the designation that you want. It's not a designation, by the way, but it's more so a rhizomatic emulation. So when you're speaking about it in this sense, I would probably just say the communication is not going to be implying a consensus under which we do have these agential means. Because obviously before the manifestation, which is going to be the I, for which is going to be the cogito, you have the law of subjects, which you're going to go against because you're a fucking retard. But we're going to also have that for which is going to have the denotation, which gives the rise towards that. And it's going to be this underlying signification from the language, which is just going to be the theoretical construct. You fucking retard. So that's why I know you don't know anything that you're talking about, because you're a retard. Now, the society functions is your view. Insofar to society having these socioeconomic types, well, it doesn't have to be socioeconomic, but if we're going into a socioeconomic type of realm, you're probably going to be saying that obviously there's going to be these societies for which it's going to have a communion amongst the others, for which that might actually be insofar to this speech act theory. Maybe if you wanted to audit this type of argumentation theory under which you're going to be saying a pragma dialecticalist would appeal that we need to have a social communion amongst the other. But you can monologically exemplify it through the environmental conditions. But not only just that, you can actually have it through the encounters and the forces that underlie it, for which is going to actually be productive of it co-constitutively. So no, you don't know what you're talking about. You're a retard. So in this sense, when you're talking about those environmental conditions and you ask, oh, what are these environmental conditions? They're going to be from the encounter of the sense for which the thought is going to actually be propagated. So in this sense, when you're talking about for the definition is going to be coming from this underlying sense that's going to be in movement, obviously. Actually, I'm going to explain that in a second, since we're going to be like doing talking stick, I guess, since you want to do that. But
I'm
before I
just
do that, I'm
keeping
going to
it
get into my
cordial.
main points. So classical definition of theism, I never said that God is going to be supreme, and I never took a classical attempt like you just agreed. One. Two, I would like to also say I never said God is not existent yet is going to exist. I never even said that. I never even actually put on an eventually temporal operator within my syntax, you fucking retard. So nobody said he's going to eventually exist, okay? Nobody's going to say he's going to exist. This thing is retarded, okay? And it's not going to have to be a cause, because I think the cause is going to be corporeal, and obviously I take the existence to be actually produced in this sense, because if you're going to be saying about existence, you're going to be saying it's going to be effectuous, but by like a Spinozian account. And you're talking about metaphorical causes. It's not what we're talking about. No, I never said it's going to be what we're talking about. Let alone it's not going to ever be what we're talking about. I said it's going to be a quasi cause. Quasi, hold on, just for you to actually understand. Usually and typically under your literature would mean something that functions in such a way, but it's not that for which it's real. It is going to be fake, but functioning in such a way. Okay. So understanding that, you might say that these fictional verses that seem very, very, very complacent with our type of physics are working in such a way where we might actually say that there is not going to be some type of supernaturalistic phenomena. It seems that now you can start saying that these verses are actually relative to our type of realities and our laws and our physics, etc. So it's functioning in such a way, insofar to its fictional domain, but it's not actually. And I'll say this again: it's not actually being our real life domains. Okay, in this sense, it's going to be virtually inherent. And also, you said it's false and not true. You're still treating false as a negation. You're still treating false as a negation and not a primary productive force, which I said is going to be the power of the false that liberates the form of the true, because you don't actually understand that, because you're philosophically incompetent again. But look, if you listen, you're going to know that the false is going to actually break those rigid structures, because it shows that it's not going to be one way, but it's going to actually of ways for which we are going to have a new. We can have the incompossible presence given the fucking labyrinth, right? We have these labyrinths within time, which is going to go through the form of time that's going to elude that of the present, for which is going to be constantly transformative in motion. That's why we have segmentaries, you dumb bitch. Now, the normativity commitments you just said that doesn't matter actually does matter. It's going to be the underlying points for which you believe social communion should actually function, you fucking retard. So it does matter insofar to the point in which you have these types of discourses for which is going to be presupposing these underlying generative consensus under which we can find each other intelligible. But that's still putting the sense either one, produced, or two, as a static immature type of function that's going to always be underlying in this sense, for which is going to always be of the same. But I'm not giving a homogeneous critique. I'm giving a heterogeneous critique. Insofar to the point I'm showing that that actual staticness was just a metastability of something that was always in movement. So when you're speaking about it, we actually criticize this on multiple of levels. You fucking retard. Now, to get back to what I was trying to say, thought or through the process of individuation, did this causal structure that you're trying to speak about in the social communion emerge, and what interventions within that structure generated the observed outcomes insofar to the point for which it's going to be processually generative? Now, getting back to the sense, because I don't think you actually got this, so I'm going to have to like educate you on this. Let's go into the circle of the proposition. So the circle of the proposition is usually having this one way of the sense which is endowed in an inefficacious, impassive, and sterile splendor for which is given from the circle. But given the circle, you're going to have the parole, for which that manifestation comes first. But you can have the points for which the discussion is not going to have the live speaker. That's why you can have a grounding in such a way for the language is going to be a theoretical construct. So that's why I'm telling you. You just don't know what you're talking about. Hey, Aaliyah, yo, can you pass me that? Yo, can you pass me that? Yeah. But anyway, like I was trying to say, you can have the signification which comes first, which are the conditions by which the proposition can be ranked as truth in this sense. That's why you have the relations that's going to be contained within the language which precedes the matter in which the language is spoken. You fucking retard. You're dumb as shit. You dumb little bitch. I know you don't know anything. This is bad for you. But hold on. So when I was speaking about it, you have the signification which never succeeds in the grounding denotation without already being made this type of ready-made denotation, for which it's going to be impossible to produce the signification without the denotation. But the denotation can't come first either, because you have the literal pointer for which there is going to be a chair, for which is going to be by the which the speaking subject by which the proposition is submitted in the first place. But finally, you have the manifestation which can't come first neither, as the speaking subject presupposes the language and its relations. So none before or between the manifestation, signification, and denotation comes first. In that aspect, we find ourselves in the loop of the proposition. And yes, I have a cousin right here in the fucking background that I'm watching. Holy fucking shit. Anyway, getting back to what I was trying to say. We can't explain the sense or the sense making by any three of the types of the propositions. Therefore, we need to postulate this for the fourth term or this fourth dimension, for which is the express of the proposition, which must be imminent to the language which produced theoretically. We don't need an a posteriori model, as Deleuze would say, corresponding to the previous dimensions like the three types, but rather the model itself, which must have the altitude to a function of a priori from within and forced to produce the supplementary type of dimension, which is because of its inevescence or its evidences in this sense, which could have not been recognized from the experience of the outside. Because the fourth dimension is the proposition found by the Stoics along with the findings of the event, for which the sense is the express of the event, for which it's going to be incorporeal, complex, and irreducible entity, towards that of the surface of the things at the pure event for which it adheres and subsists in the proposition. You fucking retard. That's where you have the paradox of the future contingents, for which you have the expressibility upon the fourth dimension to fix the problem, for which is going to examine the paradox of the future contingents, for which you're going to have the paradox, which someone, namely myself, can make a statement like of a future event, for which we're going to have there will be an avalanche approaching your car tomorrow. But the statement raises the paradox because at the moment it's stated is the moment it is a possibility or may not be realized. But if we consider the case where the avalanche does not approach the car on Tuesday, after saying the same thing, then the following day, Wednesday, saying that we do or there will be an avalanche approaching your car tomorrow, the statement would be retrospectively, in your sense, false, meaning that it's impossible at all that day, which was Tuesday. But for the statement, it's going to be both possible and impossible at the same time, simultaneously, which is going to be producing that contradiction. That's where you have the quality, the quantity, the relation, and the modality.
Bro, are you fucking done yet?
Hey, Flo, yeah, are you done, Flo? Are you done?
Different denotations. No, I'm not.
Bro, Flo.
Let him keep going. Let him keep going.
No, I'm not done.
I know.
Bro, this
keep
nigga
going.
beating on you, bro.
Yeah.
Mario, bro,
So,
you can't track for your
but
life.
the
But
denotation
yeah,
is
keep
already
going,
Bro,
just
I'll
Tron.
based
fucking
on the
beat your
fucking
ass.
already
Don't
given
ever
direction,
mention
which
me
is going to be
again.
used in the mathematical
You
example,
was
which is to
loaded.
say God would be equal plus to be God. To say God is not, that would have to be equal minus to be God, for which is just going to be the same sense, but different denotations under which the
Wait,
designation is
God
going
has
to
to be
actually be
equal
present.
minus. Can you repeat that? Can you repeat that? God.
So, so hold on, keep on mute, keep putting this guy on mute.
Yeah. You said
Yeah,
God
so
has to
to
be
say
equal
that God would
minus.
have to have, hold on, would have to equal plus to be God. To say God is not, that would have to equal minus to be God in the mathematical example sense. Now you cannot mathematically apply the minus to nothing, so minus must be applied to the presupposed value, which is to be God, which has to be fully formed and present to be negated. Obviously, that's going to be a determination, hence the identity. So understanding that, you can go into like a Lewis Carroll snark example. It's the portmanteau, which is the combination of the both of the words, which is the snake plus the shark, which is to show how the language works independent of the objects.
Are
Hence,
you done?
we can go into
No,
the
still.
no, no. We can go into the series. Hence, we're going to be saying that the serial form is necessarily realized by the simultaneity of at least two series, for which we're going to be having the series which is just going to be produced by an infinite regression that takes place by which the sense of a name must be designated by another name, which then gives a way to a new sense. Because every name which denotes an object may itself become the object of a new name, which denotes its sense, for which the nomenclature 1 refers to the nomenclature 2, which denotes the sense of the nomenclature 1, and the nomenclature 2 refers to the nomenclature 3, etc. For one of its names, which the language must contain a name for the sense of this name. So for each one of the name languages in this sense needs to contain in this sense the name for the sense of the name for which has the name for which everything is going to be ad infinitum. Hence the fundamental rhythm is going to be derivative from a name which must refer to another name to reveal the originary, in this sense, name sense, for which the pauses and the rest are going to be produced by the adjectives and the substantive, as opposed to the speeds of the verbs and the becomings by which the rhythm is going to actually be in movement. For which this rhythm
Oh my lord, he's
of
never
time, so
finishing.
time becomes a factor and a variable in the production sense. This is why temporality of this rhythm is due to the dynamic
Full
fluidity.
conclusions,
Oh,
bro.
please.
What
Bro,
Oh,
the
bro,
fuck,
that
No,
shit,
bro?
bro,
that shit
don't
was
mute him. Like,
fucking.
okay,
I know that shit was going for 5 minutes, bro. I'm
all right,
done.
bro. It does. I don't
Alright.
mind it. It's fine. Okay, I'll respond. Like, since you
No,
guys
I'm not
were,
done. So, like I'm trying to say, for
Oh
which
my
the
god.
series makes a separation
I
conceptually
can respond if you
between.
guys want me to.
I'm not done. I'm not done.
I
Like,
get that you're not done, but clearly
yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
Yo, can we let
audience
people
I
wants
finish
you
the
to
actually let you
arguments,
finish.
bro?
respond.
I'm not done. So go
Can
back
we
on
let
mute.
people finish the arguments, bro?
Exactly, please. I'm not done. Like, what the fuck? Anyway, the series makes a separation conceptually speaking, like the things and the propositions and the expressions, the names, which is going to be the nomenclatures, the verbs, etc. In this sense, we're going to have the series, which are never going to be equilibrium in this sense, right? Because obviously we have these heterogeneous taxonomical types of assimilations. But when you're talking about the signifier and the signifier is primarily the event of the ideological attribute as the state of the affairs, and the signified is the state of affairs together with the qualities and the relations. That's why you can say, what are the characteristics of the paradoxical entity? It circulates without an end in both the series, and for this reason, it assures their communication. It is the two-sided entity, which equally is going to be presenting in the signifying and the signified series. It is the mirror. Thus, we're going to have once word and thing and name and object and sense and denotation and expression and designation, etc. It's going to have the guaranteeing factor. Therefore, the convergence of the two series, which transverses or traverses
Bro,
both
flow.
the precise
You
on
gotta
the
let him
condition.
respond, bro. You
Oh
gotta
yeah,
let.
let me respond soon. I'm not done. I'm not done. Please shut up. Yeah, so of the condition for which makes endlessly divergent properties upon the property of being always displaced in relation to itself. So it fails to observe its own identity, resemblance, and in this sense, like I said, the equilibrium and origin, which is the paradoxical instance over which or of these theories, which are in relation to the divergence. So it's self-different. So going back to the snark, what the snark is, which is the paradoxical entity, and what it does is put the two series in a relation, namely the material series and the linguistical series. That's why he speaks about this in logical sense. He speaks about this in what is philosophy. He speaks about this in difference and repetition. He speaks about this in cinema 1, cinema 2, and actually we actually speak about this a little bit in Nietzschean books when we go into good beyond good and bad, and we actually go into this in like a Heideggerian book, actually 1927, being in time. when we're speaking about it, we have the best example of the paradoxical entity, which was the word snark, I meant to say. It circulates through the two series of the alimentary and the semiological orality, or throughout the two dimensions of the propositions for which denotate the expressive.
Four, you
So,
almost done?
no.
Any
About
day
to be.
now.
Oh, he
Any
just
day
said
now.
no.
Any day now.
About to be is not going to be.
Whoa, how
Any
cool.
day
Result
now.
was indeterminate.
Percentage.
Hold on, I'm still not done because I have to also show that aliquid is going to be that for which has the transcendental and
Oh
logical
my
priority to reside of the
God.
existence and the non-existence for which are going to be the determinations of something. But we're not going to get into that yet. Like I said, the snark is going to be indeterminate. It's going to be similar to the words like the aliquid, aka something which is going to be the thing or the gadget or the whatchamacallit in this sense. Because you want to say the whatchamacallit as this type of thing for which is not going to have a sensicality, but it's going to be a nomenclature for which is going to be a denotation in this sense, which is just going to point towards something. So there's a name before a name for which actually points to that of the name, for which the name actually is going to go right back onto itself as an imminent fold. That's why when you say whatchamacallit, you are using the term to refer to another term, which is to refer to an object, which is one step further than the normal designation. Therefore, you are relating the divergent series whose difference is signaled in relation. That's why the series that are noted are not abstract, but concrete. So the abstract object put into relation is the specific particular elements or the points of the series. You fucking retard. That's why we have these singularities. That's what we call them, right? That's why we said that the set of the singularities correspond to each one of the series, to each one of the series of a structure. Conversely, each singularity is the source of a series extending in a determined direction right up to the vicinity of another singularity in this sense. That's why these singularities create this network or this underground web of heterogeneity strands of these, like, I guess, series. That's why we have the rhizome, and each node in the network is going to be that for which is going to be the event, and it communicates with every other event to make I guess in this it's an amalgamated corollary. I guess the formation of one big event with a capital E, which is the event itself, right? So that's what I was speaking about when we went back into sense. You fucking retard. And we're talking about intelligibility. We're talking about meaning. We're talking about definition construction. It's all through the sense. Obviously, you couldn't get that. But you have the cut for which is going to be the quasi-causes to bleed, which is going to be in return to the quasi-cause to the hurt, to which quasi-causes to rest or to seek aid, which quasi-causes to heal. Now, we got two more things to go. Now, to keep on going back into what I was trying to talk about, in the physical world, snakes and sharks are both biologically and spatially incompatible. We cannot have a creature which cannot be both at the same time. The snake, which is going to be the reptile.
Yeah, no, I'm done. I'm done.
Okay, can I respond?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank
just
you
go,
guys.
bro.
So he said a
He
lot.
wasn't
Why is he
Um,
muted? What
He
the
wasn't
fuck?
done
it's
speaking.
fine.
Flo
It's fine.
wasn't
Don't worry
fucking
about
done
it.
What
Okay.
the
He's
fuck?
not done with his
I don't give a
What
argument.
fuck.
the
Hold on,
Not
so he
fuck?
had some
finished
mute Joe
his
because that nigga ZIZOU
argument,
was
All right.
bro.
unmuted.
Yo,
Let me.
what the
Dennis,
fuck? Yo, he
finish
wasn't
his
It's
even letting
fine.
you say
argument.
fuck.
It's fine. Just let like everyone wants to. It's for the sake.
talking
It's for the
sharks,
sake
you
of progression.
snake.
If it's for the sake of progression, I can
Didn't
respond. Like,
finish his argument, bro. Can we let him finish his argument?
well,
Exactly, twin.
That was an argument?
Yo, this
It's
server
no,
is
because it
biased
wasn't
as
finished.
fuck, yo.
well, you're killing the VC though.
Oh
I
yeah,
will tell you
hold
that.
on. I'm taking a
Bro,
unified argument. Hold on. Just to be clear for the recording, I'm taking a unified argumentation framework for knowledge qualification and preference-based organization by Michael LaJoyce and
I
Attorney
didn't catch that.
Checkhead.
You have
That's
to
the
say it
Open
loud. You have to say.
University
You have
Center.
to say it
Now,
while
to
you.
keep on
I
going,
didn't
what
catch
I'm
what you
trying to
said.
say.
I didn't hear.
Hold on. Now I'm
Nobody heard
done.
what you said.
I'm
Say it
gonna
again.
hold
Say.
on.
Repeat your.
I'm gonna
Repeat
hold
yourself.
on.
Nobody heard
Take
what you
off my
said. Repeat yourself. You cut
put a
out.
muzzle, put a
Repeat
muzzle, put a
yourself.
muzzle, put a muzzle, put a muzzle, put a muzzle. And just
You
like
cut
how
out.
You
You
got
cut out.
muted
Repeat
once.
yourself.
put a muzzle. Mute him. I want moderation. Thank you. So I'm gonna do the extort method. Put into question. I'm asked. What do I have to repeat what I just said? Or anything I just said. Now,
Oh, wait. Yo, did he cut out just for me?
something of the conditions of the intelligibility, which is going to be the highest term for which subsumes being and the non-being, for the minimal transcendental category of sense. So before you say sense is already provided, which it is something. Before you can ask, does X exist, and determinately answer yes or no, there must be something prior to something itself to that very question, under which the question and the answer emerges. So something is the condition of applying the existential predicates, while existence and non-existence are the determinations of that something. Or to be more frank, it's the operative to audit that something is transcendentally prior. As for any B cannot be asked, said, or thought about without something. aliquid is primary, second sense. In this sense, there's a logical priority to that of the existence, which shows that existence is more produced. And it's going to be, not the most primitive, primordial thing that you're trying to put up there. So that's what you have. Different existential status, which are they unified under something. Now, the only recognizable dispute is to make aliquid universal, which states everything shares the property P. But you can avoid this problem by saying you can have an empty positive content. So anything that can be expressed or referred to is something. That's going to be object level knowledge. Now, I'm still not done because I got to get into my ontological engineering.
What?
Now, when you're going to ontological engineering, because I know you never read on fucking ontological engineering,
Bro, oh
you're a fucking
my.
low tier, we're going to go into the participation of those, the descriptive ontology for linguistics and cognitive engineering, for which you're going to have the foundational ontology designed to represent the categories humans, for which naturally you're going to be employing in the cognition and language. But you're going to be taking a dose model that's going to be restrictive. I'm going to be taking a dose model that actually extends towards the differential dimensions, for which is going to be not, in this sense, very descriptive, but it's going to also be, in this sense, emulating some type of novel primacy. This novelty, for which are going to be distinctions for which humans are going to be consistently making when reasons, is going to be formatted from which the entity towards the indurent, towards the perdurent, for which those is going to be treating these type of qualities as the entities. So when I'm trying to ontologically engineer my type of language, given the serialization, you might have a OWL, which is the web ontology language, for which is going to be the standardized language, for which is going to be representing the ontologies in a machine processable form, for which is going to be serializing these type of ontological applications in such a way where we can have the computers read it. But in this sense, I might just actually put it more in the sense for which it's going to go through a frequency that's going to come towards this type of, I guess, and you can go back into predicate logic if you want to like constrain it. But you can also deny that types of routes, right? You can deny the existential quantifier in some sense, just like how Heidegger did. But how you do it, how you're going to underlie those existential quantifiers for which is going to actually be produced, in this sense, it's not going to be actually the main quantification like how Quine was trying to actually show it in formal logic. So you might take like a pragmatist account for which the encounter is going to actually become psychological dispositions. You might also say that you have these knowledge-based points for which you're going to have the qualia, but not the qualia in your sense. Don't think about the philosophy of the mind. It's it's going to be the axiological value or region occupied by the quantity or the quality in this sense, actually, to be more specific, not quantity. Because your quality may be the height, but the axiological value is going to be probably determinately assigned as a value for which is just going to be 6 feet. But those determinations are just going to be metastable. Obviously, this is just going to be like from a Black Simondon account. Now, understanding that, you're going to probably have this participation for which is going to be the relation in the indurent, for which is going to be part into the perdurent, for which goes right back to my point of God, for which is just going to go right back into the point of the relation that's going to be primary in this sense, for which is going to be mainly producing this type of indurent or this perdurent. Now,
Yo, Flo, I have a question.
hold on. We're not taking
Can you repeat what you said?
I can, but I'm not going to. And also, when we're talking about the possible worlds, I am going to take this type of view. So I'm not going to be saying prescriptively we are the possible worlds directly, but it's going to be the face of the other for which expresses a type of form of terrification, excitement, etc. That's what we're going to be speaking about it. This was also in what is philosophy, by the way. Actually, I should go into that. Actually, I'll just go find the paper.
Wait, Flo, I gotta ask you a question. Could you get into like your argumentation theory more in depth and your conceptual schema more in depth, please?
No. You want to know why?
Why?
Because put into question I'm asked. Why do I have to do that? Also, it's not a conceptual scheme I'm auditing, because obviously Sellers was taking the conceptual schemes to be primary. But the unified argumentation framework for you guys, obviously, we're going to be going into this type of preference-based argumentation framework. I think I've already said this, actually, which actually goes into the object level knowledge. We're going to be domain designers, right? We're going to have the object level reasoning, the object level knowledge. We're going to have these patterns levels, or these types of ways for which are going to be constitutive of that of the arguments. We can have these exogenous arguments. We can have these endogenous arguments for which sit at the pinnacle under which then produces the type of construction of an adaptation insofar to the determination actually intensifies. So it's extra, it's a multiplicity. But not only is it like a multiplicity, but it's going to be this assemblage, which is not going to be crucified, but rather reified in such a way which it actually has this liberty. So, back to what I was trying to talk about on what is philosophy, because I was just about to get into that. We have China, actually. We're going to use the China example. So, China, well, when you're talking about the meaning of the I as a linguistic index, you might say that's the only meaning. But it is not indispensable, because China is not a possible world, but it takes on a reality as soon as Chinese is spoken, or China is spoken about within a given field of experience. This is very different from the situation in which China is realized by becoming the field of experience itself. Here, then, we have the concept of the other, for which presupposes no more than the determination of a sensory world as the condition under which you're going to have this condition that appears of the other, for which is going to be the expression of a possible. So the other is a possible world as it exists in a phase that expresses it and takes shapes in the language that gives it a reality. Now, that's why you have the subject that presents itself as an object, which is the spatial in relation to the self, for which are going to be the two components. Now, I haven't went into endoconsistency and exoconsistency, but no longer either the subject or the field of or object in the field, the other person in the sense, will become the condition under which not only the subject and object are going to be redistributed. I'm not sure if it's going to be redistributed. No, it's going to be, yeah, it's going to be actually redistributed, because only also the figure of the ground for which the margins and the center is going to be the moving object and the reference for which the point is going to be transitive. And it's going to be having the substantial and the length of the depth, for which the other person is always going to be perceived as another. So I was right. I'm not actually fucking tweaking. Okay. Yes. Now, okay, let's get back to my main point. So, when you're talking about the other person, which makes the world go by, and the I is now going to be designated only a past world, of the I was peaceful in this sense. You're going to have like this type of ion. You're going to get back into these thrones and these zones, these thresholds of becoming, this inseparability, which define their internal consistency of the concept. But the concept also has the exoconsistency with the other concepts, with their respective creation, which implies the construction of a bridge on the same plane, for which the zones and the bridges are the joints of the concept, for which, in this sense, each concept will therefore be considered as the point of coincidence, condensation, or accumulation of its own components, for which the conceptual point constantly traverses its components, rising and falling within them. In the sense of each component is going to be the intensive feature of and it's going to be the intensive ordinate, which must be understood not as the general or the particular, but as the pure and the simple of the singularity, for which is going to be zonde, voice, and notch. So yeah. Last point, and then I got you.
Okay, last point.
So the
Okay.
concept is going to be the heterogeneities, for which in the concept there's these ordinates or these only ordinate relationships, not the fucking relationships of the comprehension, because you're going to probably say this, or the extension of the concept's components are going to be neither constants or the variables, but the pure and the simple variations, for which is going to be ordered according to their fucking neighborhood, for which is going to be a processual modularization. That's what we're going to be speaking about it in that sense. So, in that sense, cogito is going to be underlined, objective presupposition is going to be underlined, and we're going to have these points for which is going to be the modifiable and the effective point, for which is I'm going to be denying everything you're going to be saying in that sense, because you're going to be having this I, for which has the stable referent that goes right back onto itself, for which can have the denying disposition, for which is going to actually be, teleologically assembled in such a way, but it's not going to actually get towards that of the end goal, but it's going to actually have the rhizomatic construction, for which is going to always be movement towards another point upon the diagram. So given the directed cyclic graph, you're going to have a confounding variable that's going to only deterritorialize your point from within. There you go.
Okay, there you go. Okay, so can I actually respond? So after this response, I feel like I'm going to bring up very strong points, and then I just want to get to conclusions. So the first thing you asked me to talk about was to just I don't care if you don't agree. Like, just for to be clear, let's talk about it. You said to justify the language and to ask me about the fundamentals of it, because you talked about society's functions. That was your view, and you talked about environmental conditions. You keep bringing up environmental conditions over and over and over, but you're not explaining what conditions are. You never talk about it. You never exemplify it. You can say that it's in an underlying. I'm not done. You can say it's in an underlying sense. It could be movement. Yes, you did. You said it verbatim. It's on recording. You said it could be underlying sense in terms of movement. That's what you're referring to with underlying conditions. And then you said that it was never. You never said it was temporal. You denied the claim of saying that your definitions of God or God existing in the future were temporal or emerging. I never made the claim that you said that. But what I said was that that's the implication of the telos that you brought up, because telos by definition is end goal. That's what telos means verbatim. That's what it end goal. End is obviously a temporal term. Just by definition, when you look at end, that's what it means. End means conclusion. End implies some form of time. It's some form of temporal place. And then again, you try to explain the quasi causality again by talking about it being virtual and not actually like physically in reality. And you were trying to use the Luffy example to make a quasi connection to explain how God exists in virtue of Luffy and stuff like that. For one, I already denied this claim verbatim. There's no way that this can happen, because for causality and the definition of God that like we entailed through telos, your quasi conditions of Luffy, for one, Luffy, you've never established the connective between Luffy and you never established any connective between Luffy and God. You never explained why Luffy in any virtue would entail God's existence. I'll give you guys an example of some quasi causation. So, for example, someone is guilty and they get thrown in jail. It's not the guilt that throws them in jail. It's obviously like the laws or something. Like, I mean, not even the laws. That's also quasi, but it would be the judge, the people who grab them and throw in prison. That's the actual concrete cause. But the quasi causality that is virtual is them being guilty, the laws, the things that don't really interact with them. Similarly, it's Flo's burden to give me a connection between Luffy and God. He just doesn't do that. And then he says these verses are relative. Again, he never proves that. He never established that at all. And then he says growing. It was a growing language with signification and a theoretical constituent. That's the term that he used. Again, that just isn't established anywhere. I already gave him my justification for why language operates in the way it works. I explained to him the necessity on why society needs to agree upon it and why there needs to be a consensus. I explained to him that if it wasn't the case for society having a consensus, it would be the fact that we wouldn't be able to speak language. That's what I said verbatim. I think I'm being very straightforward here. Sorry for the long response, guys. He said a lot of stuff. Um, he started talking about God, about how the manifestation can't come first. And then he said it's a loop of propositions, and then we're going in a circle of propositions. He brought up the term circles of propositions and stuff like that. And he said that the model isn't a posteriori. I never once made the claim that it was a posteriori. I never even made a claim about it being a priori either. I don't know why he brought that up. It just seems to be very irrelevant. I also explained to him, for one, that kind of self-defeats his own position, because if he's talking about regresses and things going backwards and stuff like that, that one implies movement that he denied earlier. It also implies that there is some form of temporality when he talks about new things can become newer things. One, if that's the case, then I could also apply that to your initial definition of atheism, and I can explain that if you're an atheist who defines it an atheist who believes in God, that's your definition of an atheist. I can also now explain that we can move any of those terms. I can also retract a lot of my old claims. I can retract a lot of my definitions of theism and stuff like that, and we can get into a lot more problems and a lot more blunders. I mean, that's just another problem for you, because I can also just reject everything you said and say that it applies to a different definition if you're affirming that things can become new things, which you also defeat later on, because you talk about sharks and snakes, and you talk about how sharks and snakes are can't be the same thing at the same time because they're two distinct things completely. You're talking about how like a shark can't exist in the physical space as a snake, but if we know that they can shift in definitions and they can shift in names and they can shift in movements, then it is the case that I can define a shark as a snake and vice versa. So clearly there's some form of contradiction there. So just to keep going, you talk about a liquid case that I'm gonna have to calculate and invoke, and then you said that the series is not virtual. It's not, my bad. It's virtual and not concrete, and you're talking about its position is virtual, which again just debunks the shit that you said, because then you're kind of affirming the Luffy stuff earlier, which is God is like doesn't actually exist concretely at all, and then you're trying to say that he exists virtually, which I don't think even any theist would disagree with anyways. Like, you're not invoking anything that is contentious at all. And then you cut out multiple times, so I didn't catch a lot of your points, but you were trying to talk about just the what was it? let me think for a second. Oh yeah, it was about something being conditional, but you couldn't really talk about it. And then you started talking about ontological engineering. And I know you guys remember him like saying ontological engineering and talking about ontological engineering. And then he started talking about the web ontology of language. And then he started talking about it. I feel like he kind of misconfused what the web ontology of language, because those things regard super complex designs and so, I mean not design, sorry, like super complex concepts, and they kind of grade them. He did bring that up. He talks about ideological values, but all those things, one, don't really have to do what we were talking about earlier, because the concepts that we were talking about wouldn't be categorized as complex under the web ontology of language. And I don't really like see how he got from there. So right back to what we were talking about, he try to connect all that back to God, because it says it goes back to the prior, but again, prior implies some form of time, some form of temporality. So that's a third concession right there for our opponent. And then he started talking about homogeneous and heterogeneous stuff, and he said that concepts are all heterogeneous, and it's going to be a heterogeneous thing. And then he couldn't, for one, justify why. There are I mean, just looking at what heterogeneous means, hetero implies like a complex language. Obviously certain concepts can be simple, like there's a lot of forms of simple ontology or things. For example, like divine simplicity talks about homogeneous ontology. That is something that is the case. Like, and then he started talking about the thresholds and the zones of the qualification of I. He doesn't elaborate further on what those thresholds are. He doesn't explain what they are at all, so I don't really care to talk about them. And then he said that he started talking about what philosophy is, and he started talking about China, and then he started talking about how the meaning of I in China isn't really like not going to be in the possible world. I don't know why we'd even categorize China with a possible world that also presupposes some form of modal realism. And he said it talks about an other possible world, which just kind of defeats itself in the same sentence. How can you say that it's not a possible world yet it is a possible world? So clearly, like we just see that this isn't the case. Like he just simply defeats himself. And all of that just in conjunction, he kind of shits on himself like 5 times, and he debunks himself multiple times. You can see he's on his position, and that's what I really wanted him to do. He literally explains something and then debunks it just by talking further and further and further. So clearly he just shot on his own position. Unfortunately, he has been talking for a while, so I will want to conclude after this. I don't really care to respond to anything after he says, because I feel like he's already conceded his own position, and unless he doesn't justify how he didn't concede, and I just think I won very clearly here, very fundamentally. He tried to rat out, but he just couldn't, because I'm the track god, and like, yeah, that's the end. So yeah, I did track everything, guys. Everyone said I wouldn't track it. I did track it. He did bring up the web of ontology. He did bring up China. He did bring up history of philosophy. He did try to talk about teleology. He talks about Luffy. I did track all those things. I literally told you guys that I did respond to everything that was relevant. A lot of the stuff, and then they said that the Heidegger was like something I didn't respond to. I did literally say verbatim. I also talked about it's irrelevant. Again, he didn't address the meta points. He didn't really address anything. So yeah, easy win. Thank you guys. Yeah,
Okay.
he can
Yeah.
talk
So now for
however
the
he wants.
recording,
I'm done.
you're
GG
done.
guys.
You're done. Yeah. Yeah. You can shut the fuck up now. I'm gonna say this for the recording. Now to keep on going. This is how you know this guy's a retard, and he's actually not the track god, my nigga. He's a track loser right now. So it seems to be the fact that he's just shown to everybody he can't track, and people had to help him in the chat by saying that, oh, you didn't respond to the Heidegger point. Yo, guys, stop helping this nigga in the chat. It's gonna be bad when everybody looks at the recording and you're gonna see all the points that he actually missed. But look, the society functions is your view. That's not my fucking view. That is your view. Okay? You made the communion upon the points for which the socialism would have to come through a consensus of the agential figures. You fucking retard. Now he can leave. I don't give a fuck. This is for the recording. The recording is still here. So when you guys end this shit, I want y'all to actually upload this. I want you guys to upload this, please. Now you
Did he
said,
actually leave?
yeah. Just let me finish my point. I'm not gonna actually take forever. Don't worry. I promise you. Now you keep bringing up temporal. I never said that. I never said that, and that's an implication of telos. That's what he said verbatimly. One, I bring up temporal talk to bring the points under which the temporality is going to be produced by differentiation. So this nigga's retarded. And he said, end is a temporal term. That's not a disagreement. That's trivial. And then you said you tried to explain quasi-causality and use Luffy example to make quasi-connection in virtue of God's existence. No! I did not! I literally said that the Luffy point can show why it is coherent to say that there is a thing that does not exist or there is a thing that does not exist, but it is that for which can still be believed within. This thing is retarded. And you never established the connection between Luffy and God, he said. I did establish a connection, but the connection was resoluted more in this sense as the very thing that actually produced that Luffy and God example, which is stratified. Now, God, or the quasi-cause is the judge, the people, etc. No, the quasi-cause in the virtual, which he didn't know, is actually an infinitive verb, right? So, to cause, to judge, to enunciate. These are infinitive verbs. That's how you know he didn't track. The virtual is things that don't connect, he said. It's the things that don't connect. Yeah, that's fucking retarded. The virtual is not a thing, one. A thing is a multiplicity, which actually is produced by that of the virtual. And the virtual is a primary productive field in this sense, okay? He says that these verses are relative. No, I'm going to be saying that's not going to be relative. We're not going to be speaking that of the relative, obviously. That's how you know he hasn't actually read Nietzsche. We're taking a perspectivism of the, so it is not that of the relative, but it's going to be, or the relative of that. You're not going to be saying that X is relative to Y. You're going to be talking about the Y and the X for which are the relatives, for which is going to be a perspectivism. I'm going to inverse that. And he says that it's a growing language theoretical constituent. I never said theoretical constituent. It's like theoretical construct or construction. I think it's retarded. He said, I explained the necessity and why there needs to be a necessity. No, you haven't explained any necessity. And also I showed that necessities are going to be secondary. I think it's retarded. Circle of the proposition. You said that the model isn't a posteriori, but I never said I never said that. That's what he said. It's not that I ever said that he said that. I told him that was a quotation from the book, Logic of Sense. He's a fucking retard. He said it implies temporality if new things can come from from these new things. It's that new things come from a novel differential force. He's retarded. It's not that new things come from new things. And yes, there is going to be the ionic in the chronological time. And the chronological time is the time that he's fucking referring to, which is produced. He's retarded. He said, if you're an atheist, you can also explain you move those claims, and I can reject all what you just said. And I think it's retarded. Yeah, so if I'm an atheist, it's that, in this sense, I am showing that I can believe in God while saying that God does not exist, but he subsists or inheres, right? And he said he could reject all what I said, but it's not that he can reject all what I just said, right? Because I said the I is going to be denied given the Kokito, for which you do have the disposition, for which stably does deny what I just said. So I've been said this.
Yo, Flo, do you have the rec for you versus ZIZOU?
Wait, it's right here. But hold on, I'm about to end this up. He says shark can't exist in the spaces of snakes and can't be snake. I never said this, but since we can move that, I can move it to be that. Yeah, no, that's not a good point from this fucking retard. Just to explain for everybody that's going to be watching this recording. Yeah, to explain back on a snark example, I was trying to show that the snark, in this sense, the sharks and the snakes are going to be both spatially incompatible and biologically incompatible, right? But I was just showing that obviously, in this sense, a creature cannot be both these things, which is going to be the reptile slithering land-based creature and a shark, which is a predatory fish that's marine. But I said, if language requires real-world objects for meaning, then the portmanteau, such as snark or hangry, would be meaningless. But it's not in Lewis Carroll's fucking paper. Despite having zero denotation, snark has a sense insofar as it enlightens the characters of the story of Lewis Carroll's poem, The Hunting of the Snark, to spend their lives hunting this creature in the midst which causes a spurious excitement or experience, like excitement, terror, or frantic desire, which is going to be a placeholder. So you're not going against that. I never said that God doesn't exist concretely. And he said, but it's virtual. The virtual is concrete, you fucking retard. But it's not concrete in the way that you believe that is what we define concrete. He's so dumb. He said you misconfused the web of, this was like not even a properly fucking grammatical phrase. He said you misconfused the web of ontology of language, or the web ontology of language. He said ideological values. I never said ideological values. I said axiological values, and I did not confuse it in any type of way possible. He said, I tried to connect this all back to God. I think he's retarded as fuck, and he just didn't understand anything I said. It's not that I'm connecting it all back to God. I'm showing that God is that for which is going to be the primary productive force, which is going to be co-constitutive with that of the actualizations, for which is going to actually give these causes, for which is going to actually lead to that of the event, for which quasi causes another fucking event. Differentiation is the primary force, for which is just going to be putting everything in movement. He said prior implies time. You cannot, but you can have non-chronological priority or ontological sense. I mean, Plato, actually, the Platonists in this sense actually speak about this, right? You can have this type of rational ordering or these rationalization. I forgot what it's called, but it's this rational process. I think that's what they call it. And you can have it where it's non-chronological. And I'm speaking about it, when I say prior, I mean ontologically prior insofar to the ionic mode, which is going to be the past and the future, for which is going to always elude that of the present, which is going to be infinitely subdivided both back into the past and to that of the future. So you have the simple ontologies like divine simplicities, he said. Yeah, I know you can have those under your view, but I just deny those types of things. Because I said that it's never going to be simple, but it's going to always be underlied and produced by a differential complexity for which makes it complex in itself. I believe that the complexities are going to be that for which are going to actually be within, or not even within, yeah, actually immanent within, and it's going to be constructive of that thing in itself. So I don't hold to those views. And everything that you're going to be saying for an alternative is going to be different, immanent, not different between. And you could say I is an impossible world. I never said I is not a possible world. Because we're retarded. I never said I is not a possible world. So I know he doesn't know anything that I was just talking about. I said the only meaning of the I is the linguistic index, but it is only in not this. It is not indispensable. And China is a possible world, but it takes on a reality. This is not modal realism. Is he retarded? What the fuck? This is not modal realism. This is not trying to say that there is these real mind-independent types of possible worlds, right? Nobody's trying to posit that. And yes, I do believe that possible worlds are real, but it doesn't mean that I am positing a modal realism because I'm speaking about the possible worlds in the face of the expression of the other, which the modal realist would not commit themselves to. So he doesn't even know what he's talking about. And it's realization of becoming. And then he also, for the last thing, he said justify how he didn't concede. I don't need to justify that. I just said I'm not taking the arborescent dogmatic image of thought. I'm not taking those types of representational primacies under which I do have to actually get a justification towards that of the truth, because the false is going to be liberating that of the truth. So with that being said, I think I can wrap up my point. I don't need a justification because I have a genetic immanent power. I have all of these things for which are going to actually be constitutive. He didn't go against a lot of my points. He didn't go against ontological engineering. He didn't go against any of my points actually in the dialogue. With that being said, we can end it.